Apologies for that. There's a little bit of a snafu here on the technology front, but we welcome everybody. Good afternoon to everyone. In behalf of HIMAP and the many other organizations we work with in the healthcare BPO industry and the BPO industry in general, we welcome you to today's session. At today's session, we have no less than uh, Cabinet Secretary Karlo Nograles, who is doing one of the most challenging jobs that we have for the Philippines today. Um, it's not easy what they do at the IATF, and it must be a very big challenge. And we've been doing this for several months now, and will continue on. So we're very, very thankful uh, to have Cabinet Secretary Nograles with us today. A special thanks go to Jenny Marshall of Optum, who's been able to been closely coordinating to make sure we have an opportunity to meet with Secretary Nograles. I think one of the things when we listen to the IATF and all their announcements in television or what we read in the news and so forth, is that we see a lot of their directions, we see a lot of their plans and all. But it would be great if we also learned a little bit more and understood a little bit more of their priorities, the thinking behind the decisions that they make. It would give us a better appreciation of the work they do, because it's a very difficult work, a very difficult job. There's so many factors that they worry about, and sometimes you're caught between a rock and a hard place. So it's not a very easy role to play, especially at the national level. And we're just so thankful today to Secretary Nograles to spend some time with us and really help us understand a little bit more about this, how the country is approaching COVID-19 and so forth. Also, I want to thank our panelists, our moderators, and the people who are here with us today. We have, as I was mentioning earlier to the team, we have the celebrities of the business process outsourcing industry. We have our President and CEO of IBPAP, Ray Untal. We have Elaine Kunkel of the GICC leading that team. We also have Michael Lim of the NICP with us, and the folks from the provinces who are with us on this call. And of course, we have Jonathan Lusoriaga, whom was always there for us. He leads the PSIA organization. So I would like to leave it at that, and want to spend more time really listening to our Secretary Nograles to tell us a little bit more about the IATF and what they do. So thank you to everyone for joining our session today. I hope you find it very fruitful. We have time with the Cabinet Secretary, but he will have to leave a little bit later in the day because of another IATF meeting. But we're very thankful for that, Cabinet Secretary Nograles. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan. So Jonathan, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today's session.
Thank you very much, Roger, and thank you for always making me a part of this. I am one with you in
Oh, did we lose him?
I think we lost that, Jonathan.
formally introduce each and every one of them. But allow me to actually take this time to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. So Cabinet Secretary Karlo Alexei B. Nograles is a lawyer who obtained his law degree from the Ateneo School of Law. He is a firm believer in the capacity of government to make a profound difference in the lives of our people, and is fully committed to using his new post to deliver on the President's pledge to bring development to the regions outside Metro Manila and to provide more economic opportunities for his kapwa provinciano. Just before joining the cabinet, Secretary Nograles was chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations, which passed the 2017 and 2018 national budgets in record time. As Appropriations Chief, he also played a crucial role in obtaining funding for the following: the Free Higher Education Law, the increase in the salaries of our soldiers and policemen, free irrigation for our farmers, and the Coconut Farmers and Industry Development Trust Fund. Aside from working to fund significant laws passed by the current administration, Secretary Nograles is the author of landmark legislation such as the Green Jobs Act, which is hailed by the international with better access and opportunities for employment, and the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, which provides for free tuition and exemption from other fees in state universities and colleges. Cabinet Secretary Nograles is a multi-awarded legislator. He received the Golden Globe Awards for Excellence in Public Service in 2015 and 2016, and was also awarded the Outstanding Congressman Award in 2012 and again in 2015 by the prestigious international award-giving body Superbrands Marketing International. Davao City born and bred, Secretary Nograles is one of the country's new generation of dynamic young leaders, a conscientious public servant with an unblemished track record, a passionate advocate for the marginalized, a tireless worker who uses his intelligence, education, and experience to serve his countrymen, especially his fellow Provinciano. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Honorable Karlo Alexei B. Nograles, Cabinet Secretary, Republic of the Philippines. Cabsec, the floor is yours. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Jonathan de Luzuriaga, President of PSIA, and to all the officers and members of the Healthcare Information Management Association of the Philippines, as well as to the panelists on board, Mr. Rayuntal, Ms. Elaine, and Mr. Michael Chulim, everyone who is watching from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Maayong hapon kaninyong tanan. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this virtual information session. And of course, a special shout out also to Roger, who also mentioned that I can't stay long because I have an IATF meeting that I have to attend to. Before I begin, allow me to express our gratitude to HIMAP and to the entire IT BPO industry for its contributions in terms of job creation in our country. We all recognize that your industry employs around 1.3 million workers and contributes approximately 9% to the GDP, including indirect and induced multiplier impacts. And as we all know, jobs and income is very much needed by our economy. So I hope that you will continue your good work and the industry's contributions to our society. Next slide. Oh, can I have my slides up, please? Next slide. It's now been 166 days, in fact, since the first Philippine case of local transmission of COVID-19 was confirmed on March 7 of 2020. And as we all know, days after that, Metro Manila and the entire Luzon was placed under enhanced community quarantine. And we did that in order for us to manage the contagion. As we all know, COVID-19 has affected us in two ways. Effects to the health system and our nation's health. The other effect or consequence is our economy's growth. Admittedly, COVID-19 has exposed some of our vulnerabilities in our health and economic systems. That's why it was compulsory for all of us to devise mechanisms to navigate our way towards this very unfamiliar territory and try to find our path towards a more inclusive recovery. This learning fits perfectly well with the topic assigned to me, how the IATF on the managing emerging infectious diseases is responding to the COVID-19 situation and helping our country recover. So today I'll be sharing with you some of our government's major strategies and efforts to facilitate the road to recovery. Allow me to categorize these endeavors in 3 pillars, namely rebuilding, recovery, and resiliency. Next slide. So the first pillar is rebuilding. In any efforts towards rebuilding anything, the first step is knowing our situation. And as you can see from the slide, out of 215 countries that are reporting, Philippines ranks 22nd in terms of COVID-19 confirmed cases, 32nd in terms of deaths, and 19th in terms of recoveries. As of yesterday, August 26, we've recorded 202,361 confirmed cases with 133,460 recoveries and 3,137 deaths. Next slide. So as we all know, the community quarantines imposed have taken somewhat of a toll on our economy, and understandably so, because at the first part of our battle against COVID-19, it was imperative for us to manage the numbers and give the health sector a chance to build up the necessary infrastructure and preparedness they need so that our health system doesn't get overwhelmed with the numbers. Unfortunately, the toll on our economy is somewhat stark. GDP growth dropped by 16.5% in the second quarter of 2020, our lowest since 1981. So we've had to readjust some of our forecasts and readjust some of our strategies. But nevertheless, one thing remains constant, that we need to continue increasing our healthcare capacity amidst everything that we're going through. We continue to update our guidelines. We continue to update our hospital and health facilities referral system. We continue to monitor and assess that and benchmark it against international standards. Next slide. Now, as to the workplace, guidelines, as you know, have already been set out through a supplemental joint issuance of the DOH, the Department of Labor and Employment, and DTI on minimum health standards to be observed in all private establishments. Iba pa yung sa government offices. I'd like to underscore IATF EID Resolution number 61, dated August 6 of this year, which promotes measures on safety and health in the workplace, maintaining health standards, frequent disinfection, management of asymptomatic and symptomatic employees, as well as contact tracing, testing, and other guidelines. This will be strictly monitored by the Department of Labor and Employment, DTI, and LGUs, as per Resolution number 63, dated August 14, 2020. Those 3 offices are very important to note because these are the 3 offices that have visitorial powers over private establishments. So it would be good to take note of that. Next slide. So all of our efforts right now are all integrated as government implements phase 2 of our National Action Plan. If you don't already know, phase 1 was concentrated on the health aspect, while phase 2 of the National Action Plan rebalances our priorities towards health and the economy. So it considers employment, population growth, poverty, hunger incidence, and not just the health aspect. Takes into account necessary partnerships between government and the private sector, and try to tailor fit sector-specific programs in this fight against COVID-19. As a constant, and just to emphasize it again, we continue from phase 1, going into phase 2, we continue improving and sustaining our healthcare system. We focus on keeping the fatalities to the minimum, the barest minimum, while providing the mechanisms to economic recovery. So in terms of strategy, our aim is, number one, to contain and manage emerging new cases. Number two, sustain our gains, learn from best practices. Number three, rebalance our health and economic objectives. And number four, and most importantly, localize response. So it won't be so much so anymore of a general nationwide response or a regional response, but we want to go and deep dive more into more localized responses, which necessitates more people participation. So together with the critical tasks of tracing, isolation, and treatment capacity is containment at the local level and integrating the strategies on prevent, detect, isolate, treat, and reintegrate even in the business and private sector level. So sa madaling sabi, itong dati yung naririnig na PDITR strategy should not only be a responsibility of government, national government at that, but also the responsibility of the private sector. And all of our efforts together will help us rebuild. On to the next pillar, recovery. And when we say recovery, necessarily it means also sustainability in our recovery efforts. So what our economic managers have been reiterating and saying every now and then, a government needs the utmost cooperation of the public, the business sector, and civil society in our recovery efforts. Next slide. So currently, in our road to recovery, we have a task group on recovery chaired by the NEDA. And they have been tasked to formulate and monitor our government actions towards a recovery program called Recharge PH. Recharge PH aims to refocus and sharpen and accelerate our implementation of programs under the 2020 General Appropriations Law. So as you can imagine, before COVID happened, we passed a General Appropriations Budget Law, and that has been recalibrated because of COVID-19. Through Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2, when signed by the President, necessarily what was in the original 2020 budget had to be recalibrated towards our COVID-19 response. So whatever is left in the budget, NEDA will have to make do, and all of the agencies have to make do in terms of refocusing and implementing whatever remaining programs activities.
Did we lose CAMSEC?
I think we're having some issues.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get back CAMSEC.
I think we lost cab check.
More programs and projects
There we
and
go. We're
create
back.
more innovative delivery mechanisms in consideration of our fight against COVID-19 and preparing us for the new normal. So these subtask groups will play a crucial role in identifying, monitoring, and evaluating the programs and projects, and ensuring that there is complementation and convergence efforts between national agencies and the entire national government and all other task groups, and provide these recommendations to the National Task Force on COVID-19, and then ultimately to the IATF. So their efforts, as directed to them, would be focused on three areas: expanding economic opportunities, number one. Number two, improving the capability of Filipinos to adapt. And number three, ensuring a technology-enabled and more responsive governance amid this pandemic. Next slide. So even as we talk about lower GDP growth in the second quarter, I think it's also important for us to look at some of the bright spots. And this can be seen in our higher import volumes as reported by the Bureau of Customs, and some gains by the Bureau of Internal Revenue from excise and value-added tax as of July of 2020. Number two is slower annual declines in the production index of June for key manufacturing enterprises as compared to April and May. The overall manufacturing capacity reached 73% actually in June, up from 72.4% in May and 70.5% in April. Also, total merchandise trade eased its negative trajectory in June with a slower decline of 19.9%. Compare that with a very steep decline in May at 35.3% and April at 59.5%. So it seems like the economy is slowly going back, getting back to its feet. Next slide. So what our government is trying to do in its effort to restart the economy is align it with the United Nations framework, which they released in April of 2020 which seeks for an immediate socio-economic response to COVID-19. And that framework calls for shared responsibility, global solidarity, and urgent action for people in need. And all of these actually we take to mean that at the end of the day, it means protecting jobs and businesses and the livelihoods of people to set in motion a safer recovery of our economy and society. Okay, next slide. As you all know, apart from what is contained in the 2020 national budget, what remains to still be in there, another area for our recovery efforts would be what will happen in 2021. And last Tuesday, August 25, the Department of Budget and Management actually submitted to Congress the proposed 4.506 trillion Reset, Rebound, and Recover budget for year 2021. And this budget of 4.5 trillion is actually 9.9% higher than the 2020 budget. So as you can imagine, the 2021 budget necessitates higher spending in our efforts to hopefully push the economy even higher. A big chunk of that budget is actually devoted to the Build, Build, Build flagship program of the Duterte administration, as we feel that infrastructure would have high multiplier effects in terms of providing jobs, encouraging more investments, and expanding economic activity, especially in the countryside, as we've seen in our experience of implementing the budget in the pre-COVID years. Through our BBB program, the construction of needed infrastructure projects will help the economy recover. Next slide. But this time, we have reprioritized the infrastructure development program using the following criteria. Available fiscal space for infrastructure projects, looking into 2020 budget, the 2021 budget, and the 2022 budget. Taking all of those into consideration, kasi hanggang 2022, that's the last budget na lang under the President's administration. Number two criteria would also mean looking at project readiness, no, and the implementation capacity of agencies. Number three would be what these projects have in terms of impact to economic growth, especially in the countrysides, and jobs generation. Number four, we'd also want to look at the risk level factor and the interest of private sector in participating in these infrastructure projects. And number five is the inclusion of health and digital economy projects, as we've seen it as a very important aspects of helping us survive during this COVID-19 pandemic, and something that we would be looking at going into the new normal post-COVID. Also last month, the revised infrastructure flagship program list, composed of 104 projects with an estimated total cost requirement of 1.4 trillion pesos, was approved. So projects in health, digital infrastructure, water, irrigation are included in this revised list. As we have reviewed it vis-a-vis present COVID-19 needs and post-COVID-19 needs. No? I'd also like to report that amid the ongoing pandemic and amidst all of these community quarantines being imposed in the past months, infrastructure has actually moved, no? As proven by the completion of the Angat Water Transmission Improvement Project, which will provide more water to Metro Manila, and the Tarlac-Pangasinan-La Union Expressway Rosario exit, which will cut travel time between Manila and Baguio to 3 hours from the usual 6 to 7 hours. Not only will it facilitate the movement of people, but more importantly, during this time of pandemic, the movement of cargo and necessities between provinces. On to the last pillar, resiliency. And when we look at resiliency, we're actually focusing on two underlying factors here: economic spending and community participation. That's what we mean when we talk about resiliency. So as for economic spending, I'd like to point out and repeat the statement of Secretary Dominguez of the Department of Finance, who said that without continued and increased public sector spending, especially on infrastructure, public health, and social protection, our first semester GDP would have shrunk by a total of 11.5%. But because of our public sector spending, it was only it shrunk by 9%. So it was a 2.5 percentage point effect on the GDP because of this public sector spending. So ganun po ka-importante ang public sector spending during this time of pandemic. And but that being said, our administration is committed to continue its fiscal responsibility, no? Even as we are set to approve the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, which we more are familiar with as Bayanihan 2, no? So the second installment of the Bayanihan series. So this will be another round of fiscal measures to stimulate consumer demand. It's actually a stimulus package worth 165.5 billion pesos, 140 billion pesos of which would be regular appropriation, and the remaining 25.5 billions would act as standby fund. And the biggest share of this budget will actually go to soft loans to help those badly hit sectors such as MSMEs, the sectors in transportation, tourism, and agriculture. You will also see components of this law going to loan assistance, subsidies, or grants to schools, universities, colleges, TechVoc institutions, assistance to teachers and students, assistance to Filipino businesses and workers, particularly OFWs who were repatriated or whose deployments were suspended. And it also contains fast tracking and simplified loan processing to aid home loan borrowers. 13.5 billion will go to health-related responses, including retroactive payment of 100,000 pesos hazard duty pay for health workers effective February of 2020, continuous employment of the existing emergency health workers program, augmentation of the operations of DOH hospitals, and risk allowance for public and private health workers attending to COVID-19 patients. There's also going to be a 3 billion peso component allotted to the procurement of face masks, face shields, and PPEs. 4.5 billion pesos was set aside for the construction of temporary medical isolation and quarantine facilities. And other components of this law, this proposed law, would be infusing additional capital to our government financial institutions for them to lend to small banks and businesses. Next slide. So Bayanihan 2, the Bayanihan 2 law will also help struggling sectors, and it's actually going to be effective until December 19 of 2020. It will include strengthening, apart from strengthening the healthcare system, it would also ensure food security, enable a digital government and digital economy, and seeks to complement new legislations for tech companies. We have the Republic Act 293, the Philippine Innovation Act, and RA 11337, the Innovative Startup Act, which both laws seek to provide incentives to startups and startup enablers as drivers of growth in the digital economy. As to the creative sector, the Senate and the House are also looking at some regulatory relief they've promised to review also the imposition of amusement tax. This is meant to review what sort of incentives we can provide to the creative sector. Next slide. So as said, as to community participation, a whole of society approach in fighting COVID-19 is a must. It's an imperative, and that necessarily means the involvement of our private sector. So we believe that by promoting active citizenship, inclusiveness, as we facilitate citizen empowerment and participation at the national and local levels, this would give us a better fighting chance against the pandemic. So I join my colleagues in the cabinet and the IATF in encouraging HIMAP to continue working with government, as we value your expertise. And of course, your time and resources will be much needed in this fight against COVID-19. Hopefully, by sharing your visions, resources, and networks, we can further improve our response and ensure our country's recovery, especially in terms of resiliency together. So in closing, I think the digital age has made it easier for people to collaborate in real time, with even more people from different and various fields of expertise, from different corners of the planet. And we all understand how it has enabled us to connect all knowledge centers into one single global network. This flattening of the world, as espoused in the book, The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman, is why HIMAP in the country, I think, can play a very valuable role in this battle against COVID-19. So with this, I invite you and your sector to continue doing your share, to share with us and the public the correct information, actively participate in the discourses, so that we can together find solutions that work And with our collaboration, we can hone better our strategies and together flatten the curve and recover and rebuild as one. So maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary Karlo Nograles. I'm not sure with everyone who is listening and viewing this presentation now, but I'm a big fan. Every time it is Secretary Nograles who explains things, it's very clear, it's very concise, it's to the point, the details are all there. And Secretary Nograles, this is an industry that is very data-driven, and we appreciate this type of presentation to us, because this is something that is more or less how we view things from our own respective sectors and businesses as well. I've had the pleasure also of talking to Congressman Coco Nograles last week, because it seems that the Republic is quite blessed that we have a lot of people in government right now who truly understands the intricacies of the IT/BPM sector, as well as appreciate all the contributions that our sector has given to the Philippine economy. Secretary, I know that you're busy and you're rushing, and with the indulgence of my panelists, I would like to seek first to go into a question and answer in case some of the panelists would want to ask particular questions regarding the presentation. But allow me to address the elephant in the room, sir, because I know that it's very difficult from where you sit to balance health and economy, and then there is just so much noise that's floating around in the background as well. There are some political overtones that we also don't need right now, because I think we should all unite as one. Sir, let me ask you directly, how's the president? Yes, sir.
Health-wise, it's okay. No, health-wise, it's okay. It's okay. Syempre, in this day and age, it's just unfortunate that some people wish ill of some people, no? So I don't think that that's healthy for anyone, and I don't think that's a very good thing to do.
Again.
But he's okay. He's okay. He's ano naman eh. Hindi naman ano yun. He's if you're asking about if his health is in danger, it's there's nothing to worry about.
That's very good to hear, Secretary, and thank you for clarifying that. No, I for one wouldn't want anything to happen to our president, because that's exactly what we do not need at this point in time. There are just so many problems floating around that I don't think we should be focusing effort on certain particular things. I'd like to ask my panelists if there are any questions that they would like to ask Secretary Nograles before I make your formal introductions and ask for your formal reactions to the presentation. I'm not going to use any criteria, age or beauty, but I'll start with Mr. Ray Untal, if you do not mind. Ray?
I was more or less expecting that, Jonathan. So thank you. Again, Cabsec Nograles, maraming salamat po for the very concise yet comprehensive update to the group. And ako po, as an industry, nagpapasalamat po kami dahil unang-una po, yung IT-BPO industry was deemed as an essential industry from the get-go. And because of that, we were able to quickly mobilize and operationalize a relatively high number of our employees. And over the course of the past few months, we have increased our capacity from 50% in March to about 90% now, where arguably many are saying that we are in fact faring much better as an industry compared to others. And a lot of the credit really goes to the multiple stakeholders, both in the private sector and in government, for making this happen. And I also appreciate the focus on a number of things, on rebuilding, recovery and the resiliency. But we do have a few, I would say, siguro po tactical questions, no, that we would like to cover because we believe that these are key concerns of our industry right now. And all in the spirit of, working together as a society and the whole of industry as well, and how we can collectively carry the, and balance the health and economic implications of all of our actions. So meron po kaming tatlong specific areas that we would like to bring up and maybe gain a little more clarity, because I think these are the key areas that can really help us sustain our ability to deliver productively as an industry. The first one po is around transportation. With a heavily biased workforce that are generally utilizing public transport, how we have sustained our operation so far is really by augmenting public transport with our shuttles. And we would like to just get some clarity po in terms of, in the near horizon, how much of our public transport beyond the LRTs, MRTs, buses, and jeepneys are going to be activated. That's one block of concern that we have. The second one will be around the alignment of the national level ordinances or guidelines vis-a-vis the LGU implementation, because I think there has been a constant push and pull on that area. And while collectively we are able to work through things, there is an ongoing tension po, that we still have to deal with. And given our presence in 40 provinces altogether across the country, the implementation from one locale to another, we see a lot of inconsistencies, and we would like to think that maybe some degree of intervention is needed to smoothen things out. And then last po, it's we also acknowledge the fact that we have gone a long ways in terms of testing capacity. Si Sec Beans and Sec Galvez in several forums have articulated how we have now, from a capacity standpoint, close to 100,000 a day. But the question that we still get on the ground is, how come the turnaround time is still long, from the period that you request for a test, for the test to happen, and the results to be given? And the concern there is that as the lag time takes longer, the effectiveness or efficacy of the contact tracing becomes less and less later on. And maybe as a measure, an operational metric, can we get to a 48-hour turnaround time versus, I think, the ongoing average now of between 7 to 10. There are a few more po, but I don't want to overburden you with a lot of questions. And from my vantage point, those are maybe the three real important concerns, a bit tactical in nature, but I think I am echoing a lot of the concerns of the industry. Salamat po.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay.
Sec Karlo.
Yeah, those are actually three very important questions, and I'd like to answer them as briefly as I can. So first, to transportation. Truth be told, the way we're handling transportation right now is, number one, is we don't want the transportation sector to be a cause of concern in terms of spreading the virus around. So we have to start first under that context, So it's going to be easier for us to understand it, because if we have context. So that's the number one rule. We cannot allow the transportation, in whatever form, to be like a major variable or factor in spreading the virus. That being said, if you would notice, and I premise this also in my statement, the private sector has a big role in partnership, in our partnership here. as much as possible, what we hope for private companies to start accepting as a major role that they have to play in this fight is, if you can provide transportation for your employees, so much more the better. The more private sector companies and industries that can relieve the burden of public transportation, the better. No? So you will see a lot of discussions in the IATF going towards that. Para, and you can understand the reason why is because we don't want exposure. No, it's that. So that being said, if you would remember at the start or the early fight against COVID-19, we were encouraging, in fact, IT BPO players and companies to start considering either getting your people to do work from home, or housing them in a facility, or housing them near your office, things like that. Again, because we want to minimize as much exposure as possible. That being said, because we don't want public transportation to be the major factor in the spread of the virus, we have to be very strict about social distancing measures, how many people can fit in what sort of public transportation, and the latest issuance of which was you cannot ride public transportation unless you wear both a face mask and a face shield. All of this we're doing, again, so that transportation does not become the major factor in spreading the virus. Because, it's a public utility. And because it is utilized by the public, then you can easily understand the implications of that in terms of being a sort of quote-unquote spreading factor. So that's for transportation. For LG implementation, I cannot guarantee you anything. Of course, we're seeing this struggle between the national government and local government. As much as possible, what we try to do is smoothen that out. We try to get as many LGUs to conform and comply with the issuances of the national government, and not going over and beyond the boundaries that we've set. But that's easier said than done. Naturally, you would see the tendency of LGUs to be very overly, some LGUs even, very overly protective of their constituents, of their locality, because they want to keep the numbers low. Basically, that's that. So what we try to do is open the conversation, facilitate conversation between the local government units and ensure that there is that line of communication. So that anytime na we hear that an LGU has overstepped its boundaries or have gone overboard in terms of its pandemic response, then the national IATF or through the DILG can come in and tell the LGU, guys, it's creating some sort of problems here. But we've set some ground rules, like movement of goods must go unhampered. You cannot overly burden people who travel. We put minimum health standards. We set minimum health standards. So I think if anything, I think the struggle, quote unquote, with the LGU is not so much in the goods anymore. Not like before. Kasi before, ang nangyari, kahit yung transportation ng goods, yung movement ng goods between LGUs was a problem. I think the struggle right now is movement of people. And that will continue to be an ongoing discussion between the national government and the local government unit. Only because people are, they're the ones who are carrying who are potential spreaders of COVID-19. So, ang ginagawa natin with the LGUs is some LGUs will put some safeguards when people are traveling from, let's say, Metro Manila to Davao, as an example. those who fly to Davao will have to get a swab test, no, pag landing dun sa airport, etc., etc. So you will see some LGUs doing the same thing, no. But you can look at it two ways, as a hassle, or you can look at it as something that not just protects the locality, but protects the passenger or the traveler himself or herself. As to testing capacity, okay. So, admittedly, there is some lag in the turnaround time, and I'd like to explain the process. No, basically, in testing for swab tests, no, for swab tests, you have what you call a disease reporting unit, or a DRU. The DRU is basically that entity that takes the swab samples, right? Then you have a confirming lab. So usually the process would be, DRU would be want to take the sample, swab the person, bring that swab to the laboratory, and it's the laboratory that runs the tests, etc. Then reports back to the DRU the results of that test. So dun pa lang sa pag-transfer, pag-transport, and then pag-come back, meron ng lag, meron ng delay. Diba? So that's one factor. The other factor also is encoding. But, I know that you guys are more high-tech than anyone else, and I'm sure you're scratching your heads and saying it doesn't have to be manually filled up. There's a way for us to fill it up digitally, right? And yes, that's my frustration as well. But hopefully we will be able to fix that para wala nang lag. So that's as far as lag is concerned, as far as the report is concerned. No? But what we've been doing so far is trying to iron that out in the same manner as we're also pounding on the labs to speed up also their process of taking of confirming the tests. No? But that being said, the more labs that we're accrediting now, the more tests that we're getting now. And I heard that DOH said that more and more we're seeing less of a backlog, and actually they've said that there's zero backlog now, as far as confirming the tests are concerned. Over and above that, we're also looking at other tests. Hopefully in this IATF meeting, we'll get the protocols out for the antigen test. That antigen test will be a game changer in terms of fixing the lag, so to speak, because the antigen test will get the results in 30 minutes or an hour. So there are antigen tests already in the market approved by FDA, but many people are waiting for the protocols from the IATF. And I think that's part of the agenda this afternoon. And so hopefully when we get that out, then that will be one of the game changers in terms of addressing the delays.
Thank you, Secretary. Maraming salamat din, Ray, for your questions. Before I hand it over to Elaine Conco of GICC and Henkel Shared Services, what I'll do is, because we're getting peppered with a lot of questions here, Secretary Nograles, so I'll just ask fairly quickly a question that was posted in the chat line from Mr. Donald Felbaum, another good friend of the industry as well as mine. Will the Internet Transaction Act be enacted in 2020? Is this legislation a priority of LIDAC or of the Palace?
Anything that will help us in digital and online transactions would be a welcome development. No? So I read that in the chat, and I reached out to my office to find out where it is right now. No? So I was told that last July 29, the House Committee on Ways and Means approved a measure imposing a 12% value-added tax on, is this the one, digital transaction in the country? No, that's not the one. That's by Joey Salceda, no?
Yes, sir.
So, is this the Digital Transaction Act that they're asking?
I believe this is
the Internet Transaction Act.
I think this is pretty much it. The Internet Transaction Act or the digital. Yes, that's correct. Mr. Felbaum.
Is this the one that imposes a 12% VAT on digital transactions? Is that the one?
I believe so, sir. I believe so.
Yeah. Okay. Truth be told, hindi namin pinag-usapan sa IATF yan, ha? And I have not seen that in the LEDAC.
Okay, sir.
So I don't think so. I don't know if it's something that, kasi syempre yung concern natin dito, di ba, yung mga MSMEs tatamaan.
Yes, sir.
Di ba? Hirap na
Correct.
hirap na nga, tapos bibigyan mo pa ng itatax mo pa, di ba? So,
Bagsak na nga. Bagsak na.
so I don't think it's something that I haven't heard any conversation about this. Truth be told, as far as the executive branch is concerned, ha. Ewan ko lang sa Congress kung anong plano nila dito. But kami, we don't talk about this sa IATF. We understand that if we do any tax measures, the last thing that we would want is to hit the micro, small, and medium enterprises as they are trying to get back on their feet. In fact, the more MSMEs we support, the more jobs we can create. And I think it's more of, in terms of, I think we have to facilitate the MSMEs, facilitate their getting back up and running again. And I think our direction should be towards getting as many businesses as to get back up as possible. So anything that is anti-business would probably be something that we would, not support.
Thank you, Secretary Nograles. And speaking of businesses that would have the ability to get on their feet fast, Elaine actually represents the Shared Service Captives Association, or which is called GICC. Elaine is also the head of Henkel Asia Pacific Shared Service Center, and shared service facilities, the multinational back offices, Secretary, are one of the more efficient ones in terms of reacting and embracing this new normal, no? Most especially the work from home arrangements. So Elaine, I give the floor to you for some questions or reactions that you might have with our dear Secretary's presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, the GICs were definitely able to effectively implement its business continuity. So we all had the plans, and what's, I'm going to say, the silver lining out of this is we feel that we have now tested our business continuity plans very well.
Okay.
We've been doing this now for several months, and so I appreciate the different phases that you mentioned, the rebuild, recovery, and resiliency. I have just one question, and this is a question that I get asked on a personal basis from people working in a GIC, and that is, when will foreigners with valid working visas, the 9Gs, the ROHQs, be able to enter back into the Philippines? I understand that some have been able to get special, I don't know, exemptions, but the question is when might the regular employee be able to enter the country who has a working 9G visa, because our industry has our headquarters outside of the Philippines. We do have quite a few people who were either stuck outside when the shutdown happened, or who've had to leave the country for personal reasons, and now are basically working from home in their country. But that's a question that I get asked quite a bit.
Yeah, for us, as to those who have foreigners with working visa, we actually handle it on a case-to-case basis. So it's actually a formal request from the requesting private entity or company that gets sent to the IATF, and then it will pass through DTI and the Department of Foreign Affairs. Then eventually, if they get the go-ahead, then it will go to the Bureau of Immigration under the Department of Justice. So it's not like a general rule, because we'll take it on a case-to-case basis here. Because what we are allowing so far are the return of OFWs and residents of the country. But as to those industries that need, foreign nationals to come in because of a special skill set that they have or a special expertise that they have, then it's on a case-to-case basis.
Okay, so I will inform the people what the process is for those exemptions. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sec Karlo, and thank you, Elaine, for your question. Last reactor, actually, Secretary, is also R. Cabaro. He's also a provinciano. No, Michael Chu Lim is the president of the National ICT Confederation of the Philippines, representing 80 or so ICT councils in the Philippines. He is also the president of the Zamboanga ICT Council. So, Mike, I give you the floor.
Thank you, President. Capsec, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to start with a more personal question because, as Sir JDL mentioned, I work in Zamboanga, and I'm having a problem trying to fly to Zamboanga. I heard that they're requiring me to do a swab test every time I fly. So I'm preparing to get one soon so that I can fly to Zamboanga when the flight starts. But does that mean that I have to get one every time I fly? And I happen to fly, sir, every other week. So medyo marami test siguro yun. So maybe that's really just a personal question of mine for clarity. Second question, sir, is I think the IATF has done a tremendous job so far in balancing health and economy, and there is no magic bullet for that. So I admire what the IATF has been doing because there is no real answer to that. But if I may suggest, or if we may request, for example, there has been the requirement of face shields in manufacturing plants or even other plants, for example. Although we understand that people die of COVID, but sir, businesses also bleed. So, but when they bleed to a certain point, I think they will also reach a point where they cannot recover. And I was actually happy to see part of your presentation showing business loans for SMEs. Maybe this question I'll just separate into two. One, is there a way for us to identify certain measures that may not put too much burden on SMEs? For example, face shields, and the other big ticket was an isolation room. I heard that an isolation room now is required for companies. For every 50 people or 100 people, you need one isolation room. And if I may put on my business hat, now we have about 4,000 employees. So does that mean I need 40 rooms to reserve for them? So it just adds to the burden for SMEs who are just trying to survive. But the other thing I'd like to ask is, the business loan will be a crucial step in terms of recovery, sir. But right now, the banks are starting to withhold already loans for certain companies that have not been deemed essential. So would this follow the loans that will come after for recovery, meaning that the loans will only be for industries that are deemed essential? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mike, for your question.
Well, yung the measures that we impose, siguro while it seemingly might come across as burdensome, no? I think in the long run, these measures for safety and health would be beneficial in the long run in terms of preventive measures, no? So I think businesses have to look at it as preventive measures, like just like occupational safety measures are, no? Sometimes there's a tendency kasi for businesses to look at, not all, no, but some businesses will take a look at occupational safety and health hazard measures to be burdensome because, you know, it's gastos na naman, tapos gastos na ganito, tapos ganyan. So, and I can understand the tendency to cut costs wherever you can find ways to cut costs in light of this pandemic, no? But what's the alternative? If we don't impose naman protective measures for the company, like for instance, the face shields, if we don't do that, you know, the alternative would be someone's gonna get sick. And if someone on the floor gets sick, then you'll have to close.
Yes.
Hello, sorry. I got delayed. Hello, am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir,
I
you're
guess it's just a matter of how you would perceive the cost, diba? Because if
Maybe we have some connectivity problems with the secretary, Michael, Jonathan.
Yes.
yeah,
Sir.
then,
Okay.
then ultimately that's gonna cost more for the company then, diba?
That's true.
So
Yes,
so
sir.
you have to take a look at that, you know, from that perspective. And the science behind the face shield kasi says that if it is if %99. Diba? So it's hard to argue against the science of it. And I think we'd rather side on what experts are saying. So yun. Sa isolation room, frankly speaking, I'm not familiar with the guidelines on isolation rooms. I don't know if it's 1 per 100 or something like that. And if it's of concern, then you can probably write DOLE and DTI about it. And perhaps, ang ginagawa kasi ng DOLE DTI when they come up with guidelines like that, it's like a general rule, right? Because we want to get the guidelines out as fast. Hello, yeah. So when DTI and DOLE comes out with guidelines like that, or any agency for that matter, that's really just that's a general rule, because you have to understand that when we issue the guidelines, it has to be communicated as fast as possible, diba? So that everybody complies. And then if there are special circumstances, then you can begin the conversation again, you know, with DTI and DOLE na, okay, this is the general rule, but in my workplace or in my business, ganito kasi yung situation namin. And then, you know, that's when you can start that discussion about somewhat making adjustments. So these guidelines are just there para everybody follows, and then as you go along, kung may mga adjustments na kinakailangan, then it will have to be a particular conversation or dialogue between your particular company and the agencies. As to business loans, wala naman ako nakita sa document na ang sa Bayanihan 2 that the bias is really towards the essential. And how do you define essential, di ba? What the Bayanihan law does is it tries to infuse liquidity into the businesses. So there are different components of the Bayanihan law, wherein one component of which is to provide government financial institutions with with the funds necessary so that they can lend to banks, so that the banks in turn can lend to other borrowers. So there's that component. Or there's a component of giving liquidity nga to banks to lend to more MSMEs. But ang alam ko kasi is the bias of the Bayanihan 2 law is towards more towards MSMEs, so micro, small, and medium enterprises, not really for the large ones, no, because syempre yung MSMEs yung kailangan ng tulong. So wala naman nakitang bias towards essential, really. I think it's more of what industries need help the most. Basically, what are the industries that were affected the most, and perhaps yun yung mga industries na dapat tulungan. Something like that.
Okay, sir.
Kabsec Karlo, Mike, thank you for your questions. Kabsec Karlo, I know that we're already overstaying. We're 12 minutes. We overshot your limit by 12 minutes, but there are several other questions here. I would like to just beg for the indulgence of Eric Nielsen, Chris Castañeda, Jenny, who arranged for this, Judy Wisenhunt, and Karina Royales. We'll just take all of these questions and we'll hopefully send it to your office if
Sure.
we'll have the time to actually answer that. But I'd like to give you a few minutes, Kabsec, to actually give your final message to all our 100 or so people here that are in attendance representing the various aspects of the BPM sector across different parts of the Philippines po, no? So you could count on HIMAP to actually have this kind of wide net in terms of getting in the different players in the industry. Kabsec, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So siguro yung message ko na lang is, number one, we acknowledge the contributions of the IT BPO sector, the industry, HIMAP, member partners in your contribution to the economy. I've already said that, and we obviously want to get you guys back up on your feet, because we know that if you're back up on your feet, then that will help provide more jobs for the people that need it. You play a key, very important role in economic recovery. But that being said, we have a lot of challenges. Sometimes people think that it's just government's job. There's a tendency to look for fault somewhere, and the bearers of the fault usually tends to be government. So, but that's okay. That's a role that we're willing to play. But it doesn't help anybody if you keep blaming government and wala rin namang contribution to the fight. No? So my point really is that we gotta help each other. It's not the time for finger pointing, and it's not the time for passing off blame somewhere. I think since this COVID-19 hit us since March, we kind of pretty much know a lot of information about it. Not like when this whole pandemic started, in the Philippines. Right now, there's just a lot of information going around, and I think we pretty much know what needs to be done. You and I, everyone, and so the question really is, what are we going to do about it? So we know the roles that we need to play. In fact, paulit-ulit na nga sinasabi, di ba? Yung washing your hands, social distancing, wearing a face mask, then now wearing a face shield. So as we impose some guidelines for the guidance of everyone, and as we all try to adjust to a lot of these things and a lot of these challenges that we're facing, siguro what I ask really is more of partnership from the people and from the industry. So there might be some guidelines that we need to make some adjustments in, but let's just take it in stride. and let's just try to survive the best we can. Some people might also have the tendency of saying, well, the vaccine's coming, right? But siguro, as a reality check, yeah, the earliest we're going to get the vaccine is May of next year, but that doesn't guarantee that everybody gets the vaccine kasi may rollout process pa yan. So we have to start now thinking more of what we're going to do from now until end of 2021. That's the adjustment that we all have to make. It's not we have to just ride this out till May of 2021. It could be longer than that. Otherwise, there's also the hope that the virus will just fizzle out or itself out or something like that, but that's no guarantee. So since we're all in this together, ang message ko na lang, let's just help each other out. And we need all the help that we can get. You and I together are in this together for better or worse. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Cabinet Secretary Karlo Nograles. You could count on the support of the INT-BPM sector. We've always been very supportive of government initiatives, and we're here most especially as we transcend the more difficult part of this pandemic, which is really the economic recovery piece. Mabuhay po kayo, Secretary, at maraming salamat po sa panahon na binigay niyo po sa amin ngayong hapon. Sana po maulit-uli, hindi ho sana itong huling bis na paunlakan nyo ang aming industriya. At muli po, maraming salamat. The best of luck and more power to the IATF po at sa Republika ng Pilipinas.
Daghang salamat, mayong hapon sa tanan. Thank you.
Mayong hapon, Cap.
Thank you, Capsec.
Thank you.
So now I would like to call on the grand dame of software. Okay, pretty much, one of the driving factors in terms of software technology innovation and healthcare in the country. For her closing remarks, I'd like to call in a very good friend, Maria Cristina Beng Coronel. Beng, floor is yours.
Yeah. So good afternoon again, and I don't know if Secretary Nograles is still in this particular session, but we really are very thankful to him and of course to our rock stars of the industry. That's Ray, Jonathan, Elaine, Michael. And so it's really a big pleasure a great pleasure to have all of you. Now today's session, which is actually the 13th session for this year, we started last March, has broken our record in terms of count of, the highest count of participants. And this is not surprising because I guess everyone wants to hear IATF, all of those burning issues and questions that we have had. And we also want to understand the thinking process that they have behind all of these memoranda, circulars that are requiring compliance from us. I guess it's easier for everyone to seek compliance if we know the roadmap, the playbook that they're trying to implementation by our leaders. So, and I guess everyone wants to be part of the solution rather than contribute to the problems that we all face in this complex situation. As a call to action to Secretary Nograles, I would like to inform everyone that as early as March, HIMAP, together with one of our partner associations, PCRP, that's the Philippine Clinical Research Professionals, we have actually volunteered our services to DOH. So finally, we were able to get a memorandum of agreement so that we can help in terms of, one, the clinical trials that they are right now participating in. I think there are 5 clinical trials that are ongoing. And of course, in the other particular focus, which is really reduction in terms of the backlogs, in terms of the data that form part of the COVID Kaya ecosystem. So we've volunteered our services, and then we're trying to use technology as well in terms of solving all of these backlog cases. And of course, not just backlog cases, but the real problem, which is, flattening the curve or removing all of these issues. So again, thank you very much. And we all tell ourselves that at the end of the day, we all need to think as one, act as one, and heal as one with our community, with our industry, and with our entire nation. So maraming salamat po, and till our next session.